Hello, my dear friends, and welcome to another episode of Europa Rediviva. What I'd like to talk to you about today is the powerful force that democracy is, despite the fact that there are a lot of other factors, international conspiracies, all sorts of covert action operations that try to subvert democracy in various places. But at the end of the day, it matters a lot what the attitude of the people in that society is towards the various problems, because they, at the end of the day, can decide. In most societies, okay, there are some under military occupation, they cannot decide much, but the majority of the people on this planet, I would say, live in societies where they have, through various mechanisms, elections being one of them, have the opportunity to have their say in in how society is governed, and who, at the end of the day, through collective action, manage to have a strong influence on society and on its course. So, for example, if you take the United States, there were these primary elections in Kentucky now for a congressional seat where Thomas Massie, the incumbent, was facing off somebody who was heavily financed by Israel, and it was the most expensive primary election in history, and so on. Massie lost. He was very vocal against Donald Trump. He was very vocal regarding the Epstein files, regarding Israel, regarding the war in Iran. He was basically advocating against American imperialism abroad, and so on. And he was a very famous voice in this regard. And he lost, so he was outvoted by another guy who was just there to oust him. So that was his main quality, the fact that he was loyal to Trump and to the Trump establishment and to the Epstein class, let's put it. And you can look at this situation through the lens of a foreign intelligence operation, so that of Israel, done through AIPAC, or you can look at it as a weakness of the domestic society, a weakness of the population of the United States to break out of this mental deadlock, because at the end of the day, it is them who stamp the ballots, it is them who cast the votes, and it is them who elect this uniparty, who elect members of this political class that is divided between the Republican and the Democratic Party, and who cannot break out of this false dichotomy. These two parties agree about basically everything that matters, and there are small disagreements regarding aesthetic issues. Whether or not somebody is more conservative or somebody is more liberal, this is completely not relevant for the day-to-day lives of the American people, who, I don't know, want to have healthcare coverage, who want to have affordable education, who want to have perhaps social housing, and so on, and who may not support American imperialism abroad. But there is a consensus among these two parties that face each other off, and always one of them wins, because there is consensus in the donor class. So the corporations and the financiers who make campaign contributions for these two parties agree on these tenets of American society, that the people should be skimmed of whatever they can be skimmed of. So labor, they work the most amount of hours in the whole OECD, in the whole Club of Developed Economies. They should be milked through inflation. They should be milked through profits on activities that should be not for profit, like healthcare, and so on and so forth. They should be fed idiotic entertainment and fake news on television, and so on. So there is this social consensus by the donor class, and the donor class creates the agenda for the political parties, for the two political parties. and it's quite a transparent thing. So it's not a conspiracy theory or anything. This what I'm telling you. Well, it's out in the open that elections have become more and more expensive, and that the donors allocate more and more funding to these two political parties, and that the agenda of the parties converges. So even though you might vote for the Democrats under Obama to stop foreign wars, the first thing that Obama does is to bomb a few more countries and to launch the Arab Spring. If you vote for Trump to stop foreign wars, he also expands them. He starts bombing Iran and so on. So basically, Americans are choosing between these two parties, trying to oust one in order to bring the other because one was so bad, but then the other one is equally bad, and then they oust the other one to bring in the first one, and so on. And it's this cycle that they cannot break away from. Even though they they get they get successively disappointed. And in other societies in Europe, for example, new parties emerge and they become number one and they win elections and so on, but not in the United States. In the United States, people are beholden to this duopoly and to this common agenda and to this mind view that basically deems any third party as being, I don't know, not serious or being anti-national, or I have no idea how Americans look at third parties. But what is clear is that they don't vote for them. And they don't vote for them because they are captives of this mindset. So regarding the re-election of Thomas Massie that failed, yeah, you can go and blame Israel and say Israel is doing information operations on the territory of the United States, which it should not do. And yeah, okay, maybe it should not do it, but the reality is that it does these operations. So what is the response of the American class, of the American society? Well, the response is just to go along with them. Since a majority of the people vote for the Israeli agenda, then I suppose a majority of the people consider Israel to be America's greatest ally, and so on. I don't know, to have a positive view of Israel. Therefore, it's hard for me to accept the tenet that American society is captured by Israel, because if I know that Israel has this agenda inside American society, for sure most Americans also know. The thing is, they probably agree with it. They probably accept it. They probably look up to Israel for some whatever reason. And therefore, when they go to the polls, they vote for the Israeli agenda. Are they aware that it's the Israeli agenda? I don't know, but they're adults. I mean, if I'm aware of it, they should be aware of it. And if they're not aware of it, they live in La La Land. And if they live in La La Land, they have to bear the consequences. So this is how society is organized. After you become an adult from a legal point of view, you cast a ballot regarding the direction in which society should go. And the law considers you to be fully mature and responsible for your actions and so on. So if a majority of the people vote for this direction, for me, this is what matters most, not the fact that those same people might not agree with the direction. So if they tell a pollster that they do not agree with the direction, that they do not agree with the president that they voted for, and so on, how much does this weigh in comparison to what they actually do when they go and cast a ballot? In economics, we call this the revealed preferences method, in the sense that people might tell pollsters all sorts of things. People might tell each other all sorts of things. People might tell themselves all sorts of things. But at the end of the day, people make decisions. There is a collective action problem. Of course, you have the principal agent problem, that those people you vote for do not necessarily have your best interest at heart. This is what also happens in management with the shareholders versus the managers. But at the end of the day, you have a continuous cycle of elections, and society moves in the direction in which most ballots were cast. And if continually votes are cast for the Democratic and the Republican parties for more than 60 years, I think. I don't remember when was the last time that... no, I think even more. I think like from before the Second World War, there were no other relevant parties. Maybe from the 1930s, this is when this duopoly started that is still going on. So almost a century. for almost a century now, people have been voting in the United States either for the Republican Party or for the Democratic Party. And in the early decades of this duopoly, it made some sense because there were some distinctions between these two parties. They even shifted on issues. They replaced each other regarding the vote of the South and the vote regarding segregation and civil rights issues and so on. But the point is that they stood up for different things. So, for example, the Democratic Party under Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who had 4 terms, was actually a progressive party. So it was actually a pro-union party. It improved working conditions. It offered state labor and federal labor programs. It did all sorts of Keynesian economic methods to boost employment and to escape the economic crisis, the Great Depression, and somehow it worked. It reindustrialized America. It made it competitive enough to win the Second World War, and so on. And up until the 1970s, I think, or the 1980s, there was a strong distinction between these two parties, for good or for bad. But when you cast a ballot for one or the other, it made a difference. Ever since the 1980s, and for sure after the 1990s, it stopped mattering. It doesn't matter anymore because you can cast your ballot for the Democratic or for the Republican candidate and they will do exactly the same thing, as Obama, Trump, Biden, and so on prove. So therefore, the American population is, you can argue, it is hypnotized by this lack of alternative. It is in this false dichotomy. It is in this logical fallacy, but at the end of the day, it is doing this. It is perpetuating the cycle of Democrat, Republican, and so on. 2 parties that have the same agenda. So then, is Israel to be blamed for this? I don't know. I don't think so. I think adults have responsibilities and they should be held responsible for their own actions. And if the US society is suffering from this ailment, well, that's kind of it. The problem is that people know and they still do it. It was common knowledge in the congressional race in Kentucky, the congressional primary. It was common knowledge that Israel sponsors the other candidate. And the majority of the registered Republicans voted for the guy sponsored by Israel. So, therefore, their revealed preference is the fact that they prefer to be led by Israel, to be led by Israeli agents. If a majority of Americans wants this, if American society decides collectively that it wants to pursue this route, who am I to say that it's wrong? Okay, maybe empirically it will be proven wrong through the course of action that America will take on this path and through the fact that it will sabotage itself and so on and so forth. But from a democratic paradigm, there's nothing to criticize about it because people enact their choices into policy through voting, and they have the full responsibility of their actions, and this is what they do. And well, yeah, it's in my opinion, it's a society to move out from, but it's not necessarily a society that can be criticized on democratic principles, because as long as people, through collective action, determine this path, even if it's a wrong path, it will be they will suffer the consequences, and there's nothing more that somebody who opposes the path can do. If you adhere to the democratic approach, then vox populi vox dei. You have to let the people carry out with their will, with their collective will. So if I were American, for example, and I would see these things happening, probably I would either I would try to change this, or if I see that the hypnosis, the collective hypnosis, is so strong that it cannot be broken and it just perpetuates itself, I would either try to ignore it and to live with the consequences, or if I couldn't do that, I would just move somewhere else. Because luckily there are 198 jurisdictions, there are 198 countries which operate differently, not only from a legal point of view and from a constitutional point of view, but also as an operating system inside people's heads. So what people have as their representation of the world. If, for example, national values are important for you, and you're a cultural conservative and so on, there are places you can move to that uphold national values and that are culturally conservative. Sure, they might not uphold American national values; they uphold some other national values. But still, I mean, if you're a patriot, um, maybe America is not a good example for this because you can still live in a red state, and at least at the local level, you can have some patriotic politics. I think, I don't know if you live in Texas or somewhere. But if you say if national politics, if a patriotic orientation is very important for you, and you live in a country, in a society where most people do not care about this, and they actually vote to make it illegal to have such values, it's better to just move to a country which upholds national values, even if it's the national values of another culture. I think it's sad, but it's the lesser of the two evils, rather than to live under progressives. I mean, cultural progressives, not economic progressives. So from living from living in a woke society, or living in a conservative society, but another one than your native country, I would choose the latter, because for me it is important to live in a society where I can get along with most people and we could share the same values, or at least be able to have a dialogue on these values, rather than to be judged and stigmatized and labeled and so on, or even worse, have legal action against me because of what I believe in. So yeah, this is the problem with Americans, and this is also the problem with some other societies: Germans, Austrians, Romanians to some extent. So there are countries that are in the grip of some idea system, and it's very hard to fight that idea system from within that country, because those forces are so strong, and they capture the minds of the people to such a degree that they are completely impermeable to dialogue. They're completely waterproof to any argument. They're like tied to whatever you might tell them, and the only rational thing to do is to just leave. For example, during the Corona pandemic, there was this episode on Unheard that I recommend you watch. It was, I think, done in November 2021 in Vienna, during the lockdown of the unvaccinated. And so after the majority of Austrian society, a small majority, maybe 55%, 60%, took the vaccine, the remaining ones were stigmatized to such an extent that they had all sorts of legal measures enacted against them, and Austria turned into an apartheid society from the point of view of the vaccine. And the majority of the people upheld it. So on the one hand, you could argue that that's a human rights abuse, what happened to the unvaccinated in Austria. First of all, they were under lockdown, under targeted lockdown, only themselves, for about 6 months. And there were checks on the streets. The police would ask people for papers, and if they were for vaccine papers, and if they were caught unvaccinated on the street, they would be fined and taken home. And this guy, Freddie, I don't remember his last name, from Unheard, Freddie Sayers, does these street interviews, of course, with the vaccinated, because only the vaccinated could be out on the streets. And he's asking them, don't you think the measure is a bit harsh towards the unvaccinated? And the people interviewed were like, no. Once they chose to be unvaccinated, they forfeited their legal rights as human beings. So therefore, we can do anything to them. This was the take-home lesson. And I also saw this in Romania among the pro-European political class, this approach that if you do not support what we support, you basically forfeit your status as a citizen and your legal rights, and we can just do whatever we want with you because we are in the majority. Of course, this goes against constitutional protections, because the Constitution was set up exactly to prevent the dictatorship of any majority and to ensure basic human rights for any minority, for a minority of people that cannot be just stripped away through elections and through the formation of a majority around the subject. But that was completely disregarded during the pandemic and during the pandemic measures. And in Austria, just like in Germany, they went so far as to enact a law that would fine unvaccinated people thousands of euros every quarter. And of course, the outcome was to lead them to bankruptcy. They would also not be able to work and to finally put them in camps. There was no other end goal of this policy because no other end goal could be envisaged. It's not like, okay, we will fine you until you take the vaccine. The people who did not take the vaccine would have never taken the vaccine, even in camps. So you would have had to vaccinate them with these syringes shot from rifles, like in the zoo. This was the only way you could vaccinate us, the ones that stayed until the end, so the ones that did not take the vaccine even under duress. But the philosophy of the law was that, okay, these people have forfeited their rights as human beings by not following state directives, and as a consequence, we give ourselves the liberty to punish them in whatever way we feel like. So what happens if you live in such a society? What happens if you live in Austria? There is a minority of people who are politically organized against this, and also during the pandemic they were voting for the FPÖ, Freiheitpartei Österreich, or something like this. Of course, it is labeled as extreme right and so on. But the point is, if you cannot get a majority in your country, a political majority, and if you are stigmatized at every step, and if basically the state will put you in camps at whatever crisis, because of course what happened during Corona will also be enacted during the war, for example, during the war against Russia. You do not support the war effort? Well, then in that case, you have forfeited your rights as a human being, and we reserve the right to do to you whatever we feel like. This is the totalitarian approach that used to happen during the totalitarian regimes of the 1940s, and it is now slowly creeping in because it is acceptable in the minds of a majority of the people in certain countries. Austria and Germany being the main suspects, coincidentally. So what happens when you live in such a society? Well, just like in the 1930s or in the 1940s, you have to leave, because once the majority of the people have this self-righteousness, the majority of the citizens of that country have this self-righteousness to say, well, whenever an emergency is decreed, then also the state of emergency follows, which is a state of exception. And under this state of exception, whoever does not abide to what the government dictates will be severely punished. Not punished in the way that crime is punished under normal times. No. Because crime is punished through a mechanism which still ensures a trial, and it tries to obtain proportionate punishment under a guideline that is set forth in law. If you commit a crime, you will not be flogged on the street or hanged or something. You will be punished according to the criminal code and so on. So it's quite a predictable procedure. It's proportional. This is why the judge is there, to ensure proportionality, to measure the gravity of the criminal act, and to come up with a proportional sanction for it. But under the state of exception, rules just appear overnight. They just spring up like mushrooms, and you wake up one morning and you find out you cannot leave your house after 6 o'clock because it's the unvaccinated rule. Of course, one might argue that Germany and Austria are examples of societies whose internal discourse is actually shaped by outside forces, especially Germany, because after the Second World War and after it became an American occupation zone, the Federal Republic of Germany and its institutions, its media landscape, its education, basically everything, every social engineering aspect carried out by the Americans. And this is why to this day the Germans still look at the world through an American lens, and they would always prefer American interests over their own. And I agree that there is brainwashing in that respect. But then again, we are talking about adults, people who have the responsibility also to inform themselves, also to perhaps become acquainted with new ideas through dialogue, through debates, and if they're completely opaque to anything that contradicts their zeitgeist, and once you try to tell them something different, their instinctive reaction is, oh, you think this, therefore you are a bad person. Oh, the unvaccinated should not have a say. Oh, free speech applies to people, but not to human scum that has forfeited its right to live, and so on. So if they are beholden to such ideas, if they are beholden to ideas that it is only their point of view that should be out in the open, and everything else is a crime, is a thought crime. You are a Querdenker or a Putin-Versteher or so on. Then yeah, they have to carry their burden to the last consequence, even if that consequence means war and national annihilation again and national suicide, just like it happened in 1945. If this is the path that they are embarking upon, is it democratic? Yeah, it is, unfortunately. So if they are caught in the grip of this idea, which Matthias Desmet calls mass formation, if they are in the grip of this idea and this is what they have to do and there's no way of convincing them to do otherwise, and they are a majority of the country, what can you do? What can you do except for get out of there so that it doesn't affect you? It doesn't affect you either in the first stage of putting people in camps or in the second stage of bombs falling on your head. So just like in the 1940s, this was the fate of the dissenting German, either political repression or in the end the front. So, and of course, yeah, Romania, because I mentioned it. Romania is also a society that functions beholden to some ideas that cannot be changed through elections, just like the cancelling of the elections 2 years ago proved. So the democratic paradigm showed that people could vote for a change in the direction that the country was going up until December 2025, when such a change of direction was not allowed. However, I would not put Romania into the category of countries which have no say because they're under a foreign military occupation, because they did have a say subsequently. So there were the presidential elections of 2025, and there was mass mobilization to vote for the incumbent president. He was a new entry in national politics at that point, but he was considered the last hope for the pro-European camp, the only pro-Western choice, the whatever, and he had stated quite clearly during the campaign that he cannot promise Romanian mothers that he will not send their children to the front. He was asked this in a talk show, and this was the response that he gave. And for me, it should have been clear for everybody that if your number one priority is to avoid a war, you should not vote for this guy. But people did, and people have to suffer the consequences. Especially since that ballot was cast after the elections were annulled the first time. So people should have thought, okay, the elections were annulled because the direction that we were voting for was deemed invalid, was deemed incorrect, it was deemed dangerous. Okay, so what happened to the principle of democracy and of the fact that people, the people of a country are the ones determining its path? If that was cast aside through the annulment of the elections, then why should we vote for the people and for the candidates who supported the annulment of the elections? Yet they did. So a majority of Romanians did, and Romania will live with the consequences, because we are all adults and we are responsible for our actions. So this is what I wanted to tell you today. Democracy is still a very powerful force, irrespective of how foreign forces and corporate forces and external agents shape it. Because at the end of the day, people have the duty to be informed about what they do and to understand the importance of the votes they cast. And when they go to cast a ballot, the importance of being informed about the consequences, about what the real things are at stake, and so on. And yeah, there are societies in which this importance is understood, and there are other societies in which this importance is not understood, and people are kind of zombified, and they go and vote in this collective hypnosis for whatever slogans that do not translate into something concrete. And okay, maybe subsequently they regret it, but history only offers you so many chances of redemption, of path correction. If you do not take any of them, then yeah, maybe you will end up in a very bad scenario after all, because actions have consequences. This has always been the case, and it will be the case now. This is what I wanted to tell you today. Those who like what I do, please remember to like, share, subscribe. And if you want to support me financially, you'll find a link in the channel description of how to do that. So until next time, bye-bye.